What am I hearing?
Greetings and blessings. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to lesson 2 of this wonderful course, Journey of the Soul. We had a great time last week, and I'm looking forward to energized discussions this evening. And I will preface that some details may be a little on the sensitive side, and we will proceed with caution and dignity. And if there's anything that touches a raw nerve, please do speak up.
It was up here when you started.
We'll start with some housekeeping, but before then, we will thank Yerucham Kopelman and the Neshama Foundation for bringing this course to us and allowing us to learn these beautiful concepts and relate to them in a down-to-earth manner as we have last week. Some housekeeping things. It's the same link every week. So if you have that original link and you just want to save it and click that same link every week, that works well. Otherwise, I will try to send each week an email reminder as well. The website and the recording is going to be as well every week, and the email will be sent out either the day or 2 days after the course with the recording. And I hope you made use of the additional readings, materials, and videos that were up there on the website. Once again, if you can mute yourselves when you're not talking, that way if there's any background noise, that won't come through. And then when you would like to talk, you can unmute yourself. If you put your, on the top right of the screen, if you're using a computer, on the phone, I don't remember exactly where the setting is, but you have an option of gallery view or speaker view. So if you want to switch that over to gallery view, then you'll be able to see everyone else who has their faces on, and it'll make it more engaging. You'll be able to see everyone together. The chat box is a great place to engage. And like we said last week, this course is designed to have more information than you can process at the same time. So focus on one nugget, and if there were other things that you want to come back and look at, the recording will be posted. Jumping right in, let's start with a round of gratitude. What are you grateful for this evening? Can we start with Leib Moshe?
Sure, I am grateful. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I am grateful for my children and my grandchildren. They bring great joy to me, and they're my reasons for living.
Beautiful. Thank you, Leib Moshe. Mordechai, Mark.
I would say the same, my children and grandchildren. Yep.
Beautiful. Marcus.
Well, I don't have any children or grandchildren, so I'm grateful to be on this side of the earth.
On this side of the ground.
On this side of the ground, yes.
Nice. Thank you.
Almost at the beach.
Ephraim, would you like to share?
Yes, I'm like the other gentleman, ever so grateful for my children and grandchildren, and for the love of my life, my wife.
Wonderful. Barry.
I'm grateful for my wife and for her letting me make a fantastic dinner tonight.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did.
I'll have to come over one night.
You should.
And Carol, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for everything. Every bracha in my life, I'm grateful.
Me?
Yes, for Barry, my children, my grandchildren, their teachers, everybody, everything.
Good. Good, and thank you. Galaxy J7 is connecting to audio. We'll find out soon who you are. Welcome. Today's lesson, let's start by the quick one-liner of what we went through last week. Last week, we spoke about the fact that our perception of death has a big impact on our daily choices. So we were reframing our perception of death to a healthier or a Torah perspective on death, which is that death is final for the body and final for the physical things. However, death does not affect the living soul or the soul type activities which we do that endure also after we pass away. Today's focus is going to be on our relationship between us and the soul of those who have departed, and the soul who has departed with the loved ones that they leave behind, as well as the process of leaving the body. We'll also get into burial, the stages of mourning, and briefly, the grave visitation. Starting with number 1. What happens at the moment of passing? So we spoke about the soul and how great the soul is. Now let's talk about what happens when it's in the body and what happens when it leaves the body. The first text we're going to read was penned by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Many of you are familiar with him. He was the founder of Chabad Hasidus. We mentioned some works from him last week. And this was a letter that he wrote to colleagues of his. He was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich, Rabbi Dovber, the Maggid of Mezrich. After the Maggid passed away, there was a very holy man by the name of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Haradak, who took over leading the Hasidim, leading the students of the Maggid after the Maggid's passing. He took over the leadership. After some years, he decided he was getting older. He wanted to move to Eretz Yisrael, to make Aliyah to Israel, to spend the rest of his life learning in Israel, as many sages throughout the ages have done. And so he started going. He traveled together with a few hundred families of students. And in fact, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, you'll see his bio, I believe, in the bottom of your student page, perhaps the bottom of page 43. You'll see a short bio about him. And he joined this pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And at some point in the journey, his teacher told him, his teacher who had been his colleague, they were both students of the Mezritcher Maggid, but the Alter Rebbe had then turned to Rabbi Menachem Mendel as a mentor and spiritual guide. And Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Haradak said to him, the Russians need you. You are going to lead the Jews of Russia. Turn back. And there was a series of events that you can read up on why he ended up turning back halfway through the trip, and he went back to White Russia, and that was where he founded Chabad Hasidus. One of the things he took upon himself was to support the Hasidim in the Holy Land, the disciples of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Haradak. He established charity. He sent large sums of money every year to Israel. And I believe 11 years later, 11 years later, in the year 1788, this Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Haradak passed away in Israel. I believe it was in Safed, but I don't remember exactly. He passed away. And you could imagine that his disciples were crushed, devastated. They had lost their mentor and teacher, a holy spiritual man for whom they could find no replacement. The man that had taught them all of their wisdom. The man who had revealed to them secrets of the Torah. And all of that was gone. They could no longer connect to him. And the Alter Rebbe penned a long letter to the mourning Hasidim, explaining to them what happens at the moment of passing. We read a short excerpt of this letter actually last week, but before we get into the letter, we have to understand that there are 5 levels of the soul. So we're going to give a brief introduction. What are the 5 levels of the soul in order to understand what the Alter Rebbe is writing in this letter? To give a practical example, there are, let's call them different levels of consciousness that the soul has. For example, myself, when I look around the room, I can see that I have a cup. There's a jug of water. If you see behind me, I can see the Aron Kodesh, the Ark, and I'm looking around. I have the computer, I have the pens. Those are all very physical things. On a different level, there's a different part of me that takes in other stimuli. And if I look around, I can see that perhaps you're paying attention. I can see that you're thinking, some of you. Sometimes I can see emotion on your face. I can see your smile in your eyes. I can see your smile in your lips. It's not just the physical signs, but there's also an emotional aspect that I can take in from your face, from what's going on around me. And perhaps if I was very spiritually in tune, perhaps if I was very holy or somewhat living in a very sensitive environment, I may be able to pick up on certain things that you are thinking based on the way you act. So we see there are different levels of consciousness, different levels of taking things in. The soul also has different levels which fuel these different things. The lowest level is called nefesh. Nefesh is what enables the physical, the biological life, what keeps our heart pumping, what allows us to talk, to hear, to listen. Anything that happens physically is from the nefesh. The nefesh fuels our physical body, our actions. Let's call it the nefesh is what fuels our action. Higher than that is what's called ruach. Ruach is where our emotions are driven. Our emotions are found in ruach. Love, fear, anger, happiness, excitement, all are coming from ruach. Even higher is our seichel, our understanding, our brains, which are fueled by the neshama. The neshama fuels our brain, our intellect, the ability to understand things and to pontificate, shall we? Higher than that comes faith, which is the chaya. The chaya fuels our faith, our belief in God. And above that, above the chaya is the yechida, which is the essence of our soul that doesn't really relate much to the body. Those are the 5 sections. Baruch Hashem, the Alter Rebbe is discussing only the lowest two, the two that we can relate to the easiest, which is our nefesh, which fuels our action, and our ruach, which fuels our emotions. So if you look on page 42, figure 2.1, you'll see a little figure which shows the lower part is the nefesh, which enables the physical and biological life, and that goes after the departure of the soul. That remains in the grave for some time, and there's a part of it which remains forever. And then we have the ruach, which is what enables the emotions, and as we said last week, that lives on forever and goes on to paradise together with all of the thoughts, speech, and action that were holy. They go together to Gan Eden, to paradise with the ruach. Let's go on to the letter on page 43, text 1a. Do we have a volunteer who would like to read text 1a? Barry, please. Just before you start, while you're unmuting yourself, this text is going to teach us how we can relate stronger to one who has passed after death. Go ahead.
How'd you know I was going to unmute myself? Okay. As is known, the life of the tzaddik, the righteous person, is not physical but spiritual. It consists of faith, reverence, and love for God. During the tzaddik's lifetime on earth, these 3 attributes that belong to the soul dimension of Ruach are constrained within the container and garb, namely the nefesh that is bound to the corporal body. This imposes the restraints of physical space upon these attributes. As a result, all the tzaddik's disciples receive but a glow of these Ruach attributes, a mere ray that is emitted beyond the container by means of the Tzaddik's holy words and thoughts. The inability to receive directly from Ruach is a revelatory handicap, and therefore our sages stated that it takes 40 years for students to fully plumb the depths of their master's teachings. By contrast, after the Tzaddik's passing, the Nefesh separates from the Ruach and remains in the grave, while the Ruach and its three attributes rise to Gan Eden. Consequently, whoever is close to the Tzaddik can receive directly from his Ruach in Gan Eden, because the Ruach is no longer restrained in a container or confined to a physical space. There is now a straightforward path for the Tzaddik's disciples to connect with the essence of their master's Ruach, the faith, awe, and love with which the Tzaddik served God. And not merely these attributes, outer glow, that escape beyond their container. The disciples connect and receive commensurate to the degree of their loving connection and closeness to the Tzaddik during his lifetime and after his death. For the transmission of all things spiritual is always by means of great love.
Thank you, Ben.
Now, may I ask a question?
Please.
Does this only refer to someone who's a tzaddik?
Thank you for asking, Lev Moshe. I think that question was on the minds of all of us. Let's get to that first. Lev Moshe is asking, is that what happens if somebody's not a tzaddik? The Alter Rebbe is talking about a tzaddik, and the answer is, the Rebbe explains this, like we said last week, that there is a part of us which is a tzaddik. The part of us that continues after we die is the tzaddik that's within us. The part of us that's not a tzaddik dies together with our body. And what lives on is the tzaddik that's within us. Does that clarify things?
That's puzzling, because my question would be, if someone never studied any Torah and never did any mitzvot, how can their ruach be a tzaddik?
I like the question, and the question speaks for many of us. What if somebody didn't learn any Torah? What if somebody never did a good deed in their life? What if somebody never did anything holy or spiritual?
I think that's impossible.
And the answer is that that's impossible. There is no person alive on this earth. It says, there was once a rabbi who came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to sit Sunday dollars, is what it was called. And he would hand out $1 to give to charity, to make everyone a messenger to give a coin to $1 to charity, and would give blessings. One Sunday, a certain rabbi came past and he asked the Rebbe, he says, I was learning in the Talmud, and in the Talmud it says that even the greatest sinners of Israel are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. I don't understand. We're calling them the greatest sinners of Israel. How can the Talmud say that they're filled with mitzvahs? And the Rebbe said, I also don't understand that passage, but from a different angle. If they're filled with seeds, if they're filled with mitzvahs, like a pomegranate is filled with seeds, how could you call them the greatest sinners of Israel?
A very Jewish response. Yes, he answered the question with another question.
So yes, this does refer to all of us here who do have a part of us that is good, that is holy and altruistic. So, and in terms of the actual text, it may have been a little aloof. Let's bring it down to our level a little bit more. When we are speaking, I have intellectual ideas inside my head. You are understanding those ideas. To the extent that the words of my mouth allow you to. You don't know what's going on inside my head. You are bound to the constraints of the words of my mouth. Anything that I want to convey to you must be through either my mouth, my actions. I can't convey my soul to you. You'll sometimes see people crying, full with emotion, and you'll ask them what's going on, and they won't be able to explain it to you. They can't contain, they can't quantify the emotion into words. A toddler who doesn't know how to express themselves with words may cry and unconsolably, and you will have no idea what is going on with them, what's going on with them, because their soul cannot yet be expressed fully through words or actions. Our soul itself is much bigger than what we convey. And while we're in our bodies, our soul is limited to conveying and expressing itself through our words and through our actions. Once a person passes away, their soul is free to share the experience on an essential level without the handicap. To give another example, a teacher teaching arithmetic. In kindergarten, she'll bring in some apples into the classroom. She'll put 4 apples down on the table, 2 over here and 2 over here. And so she'll put down 2 apples on the table and ask the children, how many apples are here? And they'll say 1, 2. They say, and how many apples are here? 1, 2. Okay, now let's put all the apples together. How many do we have now? 2 plus 2 equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Wonderful. The kids understand that if there's apples and they have 1, 2, 3, 4 apples, or 1, 2 and 1, 2 apples, they remember that now they have 4 apples. If the teacher will straight away go and ask the 4 kids in the classroom to each pick up their pencil and ask a 5th child to count how many pencils do we have in the classroom, if this one has 2 pencils, this one has 2 pencils, the kids get very confused. And you can try this with your grandkids if they're young enough. They can only count 1, 2, 3, 4. They can't do the math of 2 plus 2, even though they just did it with the apples, because they haven't yet extrapolated from the physical apples to the intellectual idea. The idea that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is much greater than the apples. And we hope that within a few days, the children will be able to remove the association of the intellectual idea from the apples. The entire time that the children are stuck by the apples, they're limiting the idea that 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a spiritual, intellectual idea that is true across the board, no matter what. It takes time for a child to mature and understand that 2 plus 2 is not a group of apples. 2 plus 2 is a concept. Same thing is that our soul, while it's in our body, we can only relate to it through the physical means of our body. Once our soul leaves our body, it becomes a much greater concept. And one more example that may bring this down.
May I ask you
Imagine-
a question? I'm sorry.
Sure. Let's just do this one last example, and then we'll have the question. Does that work?
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Sure. No worries. This third example would be if you have a brand new movie that's being displayed in HD. It's being broadcast over the television in HD video. But the screen on your wall is still from the 1970s. You haven't yet upgraded. You haven't yet remodeled. What are you going to see? You're not going to see a beautiful HD, crisp, clear movie. You're going to see very grainy, sluggish images because the container can't handle what's coming into it. Same thing. Our soul is like an HD video. Our body is like a computer from the 1970s. So what we experience, while we're experiencing it through the body, we're only experiencing what we can relate to. Once the power is unleashed and it's no longer trapped by its body, the soul can be reached in its full potential. And the Alter Rebbe says, how do we relate to that? By loving. It's a spiritual connection now. But not only are we still able to connect, we can connect in a much deeper way, because the tzaddik or our loved one is no longer confined to expressing themselves through their body. We can tap into them in a much greater way. We can tap into their essence. But we just have to be able to think about them in spiritual terms, to continue loving them, not for their physical body, but for their emotional attributes. Leib Moshe.
Yes. My question was, are you saying that the soul itself has a greater awareness of itself once it's freed from the body?
We're going to get to that in text 1b.
Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry.
It's a great question. Text 1b, as let's jump right into it. It's from a letter of the Lubavitcher Rebbe from Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. You see a little bio on the bottom of page 45, I believe. And this talks about the soul itself benefiting from the separation of the body and the soul. Leib Moshe, would you like to read text 1b?
Okay. It is also a matter of common sense that whatever the direct cause of the separation of the soul from the body, whether a fatal accident or a fatal illness, etc., it could affect only any of the vital organs of the physical body, but could in no way affect the spiritual soul. A further point, which is also understandable, is that during the soul's lifetime in earth, in partnership with the body, the soul is necessarily handicapped in certain respects by the requirements of the body, such as eating and drinking, etc. Even a tzaddik whose entire life is consecrated to Hashem cannot escape the restraints of life in a material and physical environment. Consequently, when a time comes for the soul to return home, it is essentially a release for it as it makes its ascent to a higher world, no longer restrained by a physical body and physical environment. Henceforth, the soul is free to enjoy the spiritual bliss of being near to Hashem in the fullest measure.
Okay, and to bring greater clarity, to answer Leib Moshe's question, I am going to share over here a video that brings out this point in a beautiful way.
How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear? That's what psychologists call inattentional blindness. And no, it is not a condition to be concerned about. In fact, life would be impossible without it. Let me explain. As powerful as the human brain may be, it is easily overwhelmed by the sheer onslaught of observation, calculation, sight, sound, and signals that envelop our every waking hour. The brain cannot permit itself to register and record each image and movement, every message and stimulation. Instead, our brains and nervous systems aggressively filter and limit our intake to manageable levels. The result? We notice a fraction and ignore the fullness and remember far less. Often, we purposely engage in what cognitive neuroscientists call selective attention, like focusing on a dinner partner in a crowded restaurant while tuning out all other conversations in the room. Now imagine that you have the ability to absorb everything around you. To absorb, comprehend, and recall all the details, and fetch every memory at will, without being overwhelmed. That is the incredible experience of the human soul, once it detaches from the body at the close of a lifetime. Unshackled from the frailties of a nervous system, unrestricted by networks of neurons. It is unbelievably free and powerfully present. It is free to absorb truths that mortal minds cannot contain, present to delight in the divine radiance that courses through the cosmos, to bask in divine understanding that supersedes human senses, but is savored by the newly liberated soul.
So yes, as I forget the name, Professor Henry Bergson has suggested that one of the main functions of the brain and nervous system is to eliminate activity and awareness rather than produce it.
Rather than what?
Rather than produce it.
Okay.
That is very ironic. Just at the moment that you get everything, you say, and I finally understand. It's too late to do anything about it in the physical world.
Yeah. So, did that video help clarify things for you guys?
It
Yeah.
When I watched it also, it brought a whole new clarity to me. So, in short, at the moment of passing, the good intensifies. All of the negative traits disappear and will be buried and erode together with the body. And all of the good intensifies and becomes unleashed. And that is perhaps another reason why we have fond memories of people who have passed away. Although it's true, that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And yes, those annoying people are no longer doing those annoying things to aggravate us. But also, the goodness that they have, their positive qualities have intensified and magnified to much greater levels. So the more we love, the more we connect. And when we connect, we're connecting to the deepest part of our loved one.
Could you expound on that, Rabbi, a little bit?
Sure.
When you say, I mean, it's obvious to love them when they're in their body, when people are alive. But what would be the way to do that when they've passed? In terms of Judaic thought? What practice?
The short answer is that we will get a little bit more into that. And the answer is by doing mitzvahs and learning Torah in their merit and in their honor and merit, thinking about them.
Okay.
And doing mitzvahs for them.
Okay. Thank you.
So just as our relationship has to evolve. Our relationship always has to evolve, and also tapping into their qualities, the positive things about them, the things that we learned from them, and tapping into that in our own lives also amplifies that. So just as our relationship with our children grows, and we'll start with shaking a rattle for your baby and then reading them a little storybook like Cat in the Hat, and moving on to playing Monopoly with them. And then when they're a teenager, having emotional or philosophical conversations. It's a new stage, and it takes time getting used to this spiritual kind of connection, but it's a powerful one. And the more we love them, and the more we connect to them by doing mitzvahs, doing the things that they would have wanted us to do, giving them nachas, fosters and bolsters that connection. In fact, in modern psychology, they call that continuing bonds. There's the modern psychologists believe that in these continuing bonds after passing, they call it continuing bonds, and you can search up more about that. Let's guide ourselves through a little bit of an imagery, a short visualization based on an answer of the Lubavitcher Rebbe to a family that had lost a loved one. Let's try to think about some loved one that we have lost, and some event that we wish they would have been at, or perhaps something that is going to happen in the future that we dread missing them. How sad we feel that they're not there to enjoy the sights, the sounds, the smell, the excitement. And let's think of it this way. Let's think of it as we are in a 2-story building and we are at that event. You are at that event on the 1st floor with the good food, the soft music, the entertainment, sitting and milling about, enjoying yourselves. And your loved one is on the 2nd floor. Close, but not that close. Present in the building, but not in the same room. Feel the comfort knowing that they're just upstairs, that they're in the same building as you. Close enough to hear, close enough to appreciate, close enough to enjoy, and just too far that you can't see them. And that's what it's like. The soul is spiritual. It's not bound anymore to physical place. It's not bound anymore to physical location. We are taught that by the time of a wedding, the souls from 3 generations on each side come and join in the celebration. The souls are here, the souls are present. And if we are sensitive enough, we can even feel their presence. So to summarize this first part, what we have gotten to is that the neshama is limited by the body, and at the moment of passing, it loses those limitations, and we can connect with the essence. The essence of the neshama can experience itself, and the way to connect is through love and spiritual pursuits. Does anyone have questions on section 1 before we move forward?
Sure.
All clear?
Means I have to
You can
remember.
agree.
Okay, section number 2.
Okay.
The flip side. Something that may seem a little strange based on everything we've learned up until now. Section 2 will describe the pain that the soul experiences at death. End of life distress. So to begin with, let's begin a little bit before the actual passing, some practical things, which is that the moments before passing can be very difficult for the deceased and for the family members who are present. So a few things that can be comforting would be, number 1, open and honest emotional conversation, speaking about the elephant in the room. A dying person knows that they're about to die and perhaps may be afraid. Validating, comforting, and talking about death may be comforting for the deceased, for the patient. Reminiscing, talking about the good old days, the happy times, the pleasant times, the good things that you've learned from them and brought into your own life from the things that they have taught you is extremely positive for them. Physical contact with the dying person can be very soothing up until the moment where they are actually about to pass away, at which time it's better not to touch them. But leading up in those moments, leading up to death, a physical contact can be very soothing. presence of family, even without saying anything, just being there, can be very, very meaningful. And music, calming atmosphere, or scent therapy, all of these can aid in the calming and relaxation of a dying patient. So based on everything that we've learned, we would think that the soul is very happy to leave the body. We spoke last week how the soul started from before and came down into this body, didn't want to come down, and is going to enjoy itself blissfully in heaven. After death, the soul is able to experience itself and connect with us in much greater ways than it's down here. We would think that the soul would be very happy to leave the body. Yet, the Zohar tells us otherwise. Let's look page 47, text number 2. The Zohar, part 3, page 88a says, nothing is as hard for the soul as its separation from the body. Nothing is as hard for the soul as its separation from the body. Why? Firstly, it's a transition. Any transition is difficult. A child on the first day of school, getting a new job, moving to a new house, all of these things are anxiety provoking and difficult. So a person would rather stay with what they know, even if it's not perfect, than move somewhere else, which is foreign, which is a new transition to someplace new. Number 2, which we discussed last week, is that the soul, once it leaves the body, will no longer be able to do any mitzvahs. Like Lev Moshe said, it's too late to do anything about it now. The soul wishes to stay here to be able to do mitzvahs. And the third reason, perhaps most importantly, is that there's an attachment and a bond. You've all seen the guy who has this his 1980s Cadillac that he still drives because it didn't yet die. It doesn't have a USB port. It can't play the radio, can't connect to his phone, but it's his car that he's attached to. It's his car that he's had since 1983, and he's not giving it up for anything until it dies. It'll go to the mechanic every week to fix a different part, but there's an attachment there. The soul had a real integration with our body, and as much as the body was affected by the soul was affected by our body. The soul grew accustomed to waking up in the morning and eating breakfast, all the things that we do every day. And the soul grew a certain affinity for the body and for the world. And now it is going to be ripped away from that. Almost like the odd couple, the proverbial odd couple, who never get along about anything. They're arguing day and night. Yet when one of them passes away, the other is inconsolable and feels like part of them is missing. And you have those three reasons on page 48, figure 2.2, the reasons why a soul experiences difficulty in parting from the body, which is that even necessary and good transitions can be hard. Mitzvahs can only be performed down here. And there's a trauma that's related to breaking the bond. And the truth is that the soul is so attached to the body that until the body decomposes, the soul doesn't completely leave. And we're going to see over here 3 additional stages. We spoke about the ruach. At the moment of death, the ruach is unleashed and separates from the body. And there are another 3 time periods. Let's look inside in the text. First of all is text number 3. Do we have a volunteer for text number 3? Page 49.
Sure.
For 3 days, the soul hovers above the body, thinking that it can return to it. After 3 days, when it sees that the body's face has changed, it leaves the body and departs.
Thank you. Thank you, Ephraim. The soul doesn't believe, it doesn't want to believe that its mission is over, that its connection is over. It stays around. It stays around for 3 days trying to come back into the body. And only once the face of the body starts changing and the body starts to decompose, does the soul give up. The body is so precious to the soul and was so integral to its mission, and it's forever grateful. It does not want to leave this body. During the time that the soul is decomposing, the soul is displaced. And there are 4 general stages to the soul's departure, which would be at the time of passing, then the 3 days, the 7 days, 30 days, and 1 year. Text number 4a. Mark, would you like to read number 4a?
Sure. For 7 days, the soul goes from the house where it lived to the grave, and from the grave back to the house, and it mourns its body. After 7 days, the body is subjected to its fate, and the soul ascends to its place.
Thank you, Mordechai. And the next stage is the 30 days. Marcus, are you comfortable reading number 4b?
For 30 days, the soul and the body are judged as one, and thus the soul is located down here on earth. After that, the soul ascends while the body arose in the earth.
Thank you, Marcus. And Betty, would you like to read number 4c? You'll have to unmute yourself first. If you see the microphone button, let me see. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Something should pop up and you'll click accept.
I got it. Okay. For 12 months, the body still exists and the soul ascends and descends. After 12 months, the body becomes null and the soul rises and no longer returns. Okay.
Okay.
Question.
Sure.
I always learned that on the yard site, the soul does come back to visit. Is that correct or incorrect? That's why we like that Ner Neshama. It's my custom, the Ner Neshama. And I was always told that the Neshama is with us.
I'm going to have to look into that for you about the neshama coming back. We do visit the grave on the yard site, as well as light the neshama candle. That's a great question. Does the neshama come back to the grave on your yard site? Let me write that down.
Okay, thank you.
I'll look into that.
Another question.
Sure.
What happens if there's a cremation?
It's a very good question.
6 million Jews.
Sorry?
What happened to the 6 million Jews from the Holocaust?
So those are both 2 very sensitive questions. We will get there very soon. If we can hold on to those questions for a moment, we will deep dive into cremation. Let's move on to text number 5, which is that there's actually different stages of mourning, which reflect these different stages of the soul's connection to the body. On page number 52, this is from the Rambam Maimonides from Mishnah Torah. Mourners observe 3 days of weeping, 7 days of eulogies, and for 30 days, restrictions on haircuts and wearing freshly ironed clothing, marrying, joining a celebration of friends, traveling on business. And then we'll see in text number 6, which is that there's also, this extends to 12 months as well for a immediate child who is mourning their parents. So we're going to get in next week, we're going to get more into the mourning part of it. However, the Talmud and the Kabbalah are telling us that there's a connection between the mourning process as well as the soul's connection to the body. Which is that we are not only mourning the loss of the deceased, we are also mourning the pain of the soul that has parted as well. Like we've explained, that the soul is pained, and these varying levels of coming back to the body, coming back to the grave, coming back to the house, Slowly but surely, the soul acclimates to its new place, as do the mourners acclimate and lessen their restrictions. This is pointed out also in a very curious halacha brought down in the Talmud in the context of a story, which brings out that the soul itself needs comfort. If we look on page number 54, text number 7, the Talmud states in Masechet Shabbat, if a person dies and leaves no next of kin to be comforted, 10 people should go and sit in the deceased home. Now a story. A man died in Rabbi Yehuda's neighborhood. As there were no mourners to be comforted, Rabbi Yehuda assembled 10 people every day, and they sat in the deceased home. After 7 days, the dead man appeared to Rabbi Yehuda in a dream and said, "May your mind be at rest, for you have set my mind at rest." So if we're going to understand the concept of Shiva as just to comfort the mourners, then why in the world would we be going to sit Shiva in someone's house if there's no mourners to be comforted? So the answer is that Shiva is also about sharing in the soul's pain. And so it's very important whether there are mourners or not, which is also interesting to note that the expression said is to the mourners is Hamakom Yanachem Eschem in the plural. May Hashem comfort you. Whether there's one person sitting Shiva or multiple people sitting Shiva, the expression is a multiple you. The reason for that, as explained by Sefer Charedim, I believe, or maybe the Sfas Emes, is that when we're talking to Hamakom Yanachem Eschem, the Lord should comfort you, we are speaking to the mourners and to the soul of the deceased. So to summarize, we've explained why death is difficult for the soul. It's a transition. There's a bond that was connected, and the soul doesn't want to leave because it doesn't want to do, it can no longer do mitzvahs. The body does not want to leave. The soul, does not want to leave the body until the body has decomposed. We'll see soon that there is a part of the soul that remains in the grave even after the 12 months forever, and that's the part of the soul that is awakened when we visit. And that the comforting is not only there to comfort the mourners, but to comfort the soul as well, which is pained by its having to leave the body and move on. Do we have any questions on section 2 before we move on to section 3? Okay. Section number 3. We've discussed a lot about the soul, but what happens to the body? The first part we're going to discuss over here is about the holiness and how special the body is itself. The body is holy and must be treated with reverence and respect. So the first thing is that many people will go to a service, and you've for sure seen this happen, that they'll go to a funeral service and they'll go to the chapel, and all the family and all the friends will come and they'll listen to the eulogies, and perhaps they'll cry, they'll shed a tear, and they'll be inspired. And then they'll leave, and a few people may follow the hearse out to the graveyard, to the burial. This is a mistake. In fact, the actual word for a funeral in Hebrew is a lavaya. Who here speaks Hebrew? What does lavaya mean? Lavaya means to escort, to accompany.
Hello. Okay.
Livui.
Yeah.
So the actual lavaya is not about the eulogies, but about accompanying the soul, accompanying the body on its journey, on its final journey. So even if you're not able to, for whatever reason, follow the hearse or the coffin all the way to where it's going to be buried, you should walk, and the amount of steps is at least 6 feet behind the hearse or behind the coffin, in that way taking part in sending off the deceased in their last travel. So the mitzvah is not about attending the funeral. The mitzvah is about actually joining and accompanying and sending off the body on its last journey. That leads us to interment. Before we begin interment, we have to understand about the body. What is the holiness of the body? And is the body holy, or is the body just a sheath that housed a holy soul and is now lifeless, and we have to get rid of it somehow? Let's turn to page 55, text number 8a. The Talmud in Masechta Moed Katan says that one who is present at the time of a person's passing is required to tear their clothing. This is because a person's passing is likened to the burning of a Torah scroll. There is a connection between a person's soul passing and a Torah scroll that is intentionally being burned. Firstly, it's important to note that this law does not apply these days because people avoided the house of dying people and did not want to be there to comfort the people as they were dying. They didn't have wardrobes like we have today. And even with our wardrobes that we have today, people are very hesitant to tear Kriya. So people stopped going and the patients were dying alone. So the rabbis declared that we should not be tearing our clothes at the site of or at the time of a person's passing. Rather, it is more important to be there with them while they're passing away. But the question that we have to understand is, what's the connection between a human being, a Jew, and a Torah scroll? Any suggestions?
Hashem created both of us.
Hashem created the Torah and Hashem created the Jew. Correct. They're both holy.
Right. The preciousness and the value of the physical body.
The value and the preciousness of the body, just like a Torah, is very holy and precious. Let's look at text number 8b and see how the Ramban, Nachmanides, explains the connection. And he says that the sacred names of God that are inked into the Torah scroll parchment are an analogy for the soul that is installed within the corporeal body. So there we have it. There's a body and a soul. The Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, has a body. A piece of leather, an animal hide, which could just as well have been a boot or a belt. But it was turned into a Torah scroll when the name of God was inscribed onto that piece of leather. Same thing as a human body, lifeless dust and earth, was turned into a Jewish person who has done mitzvahs and learned Torah and can attain great holiness and connection to God. So if we look at text number 9, this is brought out even more, which is text number 9 on page 57. All who tend to a corpse must be aware that they are handling a holy entity. The human body is more than simply a sheath to a sacred entity, a tool that serves a supernal soul. Rather, it has itself become sanctified with an independent holiness, similar to a Torah scroll. And it's been explained that if you see a Torah scroll burning, you actually have to tear Kriya twice, once for the words and once for the parchment. So too, the soul is holy and the body has an independent holiness. As such, we must treat the body with utmost dignity and respect. Carol was part of the Chevra Kadisha for a number of years. Anyone who was involved will know how it works with the Chevra Kadisha, that there is a holy society, they are called, of people who take upon themselves to prepare those who have deceased for burial. Great pains are taken to accord the body great respect and dignity. It is treated delicately, never as a lifeless, feelingless object. No casual conversation is allowed in the presence of the deceased.
They also sit, if I may, they also sit with the body so that it's not alone.
Correct. There's a concept of a shomer, which is even if in today's climate where the body is in a morgue, a refrigerator, where we don't have to be worried about animals coming and disgracing it, there is still a shomer who sits in the next room, often with a window that they can see the deceased in the refrigerator, and that is a sign of respect. Correct? We remain with them as a guard of respect the entire time until the deceased is buried. The deceased is covered even while it's being cleansed. The deceased is covered. The private areas are only uncovered during the moments that they are actually being washed. Men tend to male deceased and women wash and dress the female dead. The body is never placed face down, even while they're washing the back of the body, as being laid face down is considered disrespectful. Those are some of the ways that we respect the dead, and you can read text number 10 about the honor guard. All of this is summarized in figure 2.3 on page 59. Every single part of the body is buried, including skin, bone fragments, tissue, fluid, anything, any part of the body that was around at the time of death is considered holy and must be buried. Which is why, if you've seen on the news any terrorist attack in Israel, you will see a crew on scene called Zaka. They come and they collect blood from buildings, from streets, from curtains, from blinds, from sheets, from anything. Because every single part of the body is taken to burial. Why are these little parts of the body so important? Let's just bury the main part of the body, and whatever is left, let it go to wherever it goes. The answer to that is found by Rabbi Moshe Sofer in text 11 on page number 60 about a Torah scroll. There is no differentiation in reverential treatment between a complete Torah scroll and a single letter that has become detached from a Torah scroll. In fact, many of you will be aware and familiar with the concept of Geniza or Shemus, that if there's a part of a prayer book or a siddur or a chumash which falls on the floor, we run and we pick it up and we kiss it. And if there's a part that comes detached, we take it to either to the shul or straight to the funeral home, and it gets buried. Even one letter, even one word. Similarly, he continues, it is forbidden to handle with disrespect even a single bone that has become detached from a sacred body that was created in God's image. We'll take a moment here also to discuss organ donations. It can be an entire class for itself. The short of the Jewish perspective on organ donations is, number one, if your organ is going to be used to save somebody's life right now, that would be permitted. In the vast, vast, vast majority of cases, the organs are not used straight away. Very often they are put into a refrigerator and disposed of eventually, or used for research. And very often the organs are harvested while the person is brain dead, but not actually fully dead yet, not halachically dead yet. So it's speak to a rabbi if you are currently an organ donor and would like to make sure that your body gets the proper respect and proper burial so that your soul can have the proper rest and respite that it yearns for. Speak it over with a rabbi, look it over. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them after. Organ donation as a general rule is not something that works out with these concepts of burial and making sure that the soul has its proper rest. So to summarize that section is that the body is very holy and we therefore treat the body with respect, leading into many of the aspects of burial and the tahara leading up to the burial all for the dignity and sanctity of the body. Now let's move into section number 3b, or section number 4, which is burial. Burial has always been of utmost importance to the Jewish nation. Sad stories of inspiration throughout our history attest to the reality that Jews have consistently suffered supreme sacrifices to ensure a Jewish burial. But why? I have to preface that we are going to be making a strong case against cremation, which may be a very sensitive topic for many. Many of us have loved ones who were cremated. And I must preface that somebody who was cremated by no fault of their own, or due to a lack of knowledge, is not who we're talking about. We're talking about ourselves who do know. We're talking about ourselves who are informed. We're talking about the ultimate truths that are associated with burial and what happens in a cremation. People who were cremated against their will, people who were cremated due to a lack of knowledge, that's not held against them. For us to understand and for us to know for ourselves, it is very important to have an understanding of what cremation does and its hindrance on the journey of the soul. I'm going to say again that I would like to be as sensitive as I can for the past, for those of us who have relatives that have been cremated. Yet I will try to remain as strong and firm as I can to make as convincing of an argument as I can for us or any loved ones that we know who have planned cremation, to help change our perspective on that. Statistically, they say that more people are afraid of public speaking than they are afraid of death. More people are afraid of public speaking than they are afraid of death. So based on that statistic, if you're ever at a funeral, most people there would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy.
I don't know. I think I would try the eulogy.
So where does the concept of burial initiate? Where do we learn that a Jewish person must be buried? Text number 12 from Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 23. This is talking about someone who has been killed for a crime and has been hung. The body must be hung for all to see and to understand that they should not commit such crimes. Yet the Torah tells us, Ki kavor sikbarenu bayom ahu, you shall surely bury them on that same day of their death. The way King Solomon talks about burial in Ecclesiastes is that the people proceed to their eternal abodes. You can find this on page 62. People proceed to their eternal abodes, and the mourners go about the streets. The dust returns to the earth as it was, while the spirit returns to the God who bestowed it. We are custodians of our body. We don't own our bodies. And we have to return it. We have to take care of it. And when the time comes, we have to return it. Hashem takes back the soul by himself. There is no way for us to hand back, per se, the body, yet we can do as Hashem has instructed us to return it where it came from, just like Adam. And we see in, I believe this is in text number 14, from Rabbi Chaim Vital, this is from the Zohar, for you are dust and you will return to dust, is a verse in Genesis 3:19, Bereshis. And he explains that the body comes from the earth and is entrusted as a deposit to the individual's care. Upon death, the deposit must be returned to the earth from where it came and buried there. Just like Adam was created with a soul from God and a body from the earth, when we die, God takes back our soul and our body must return to the earth. And in fact, if we think about what King Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon said, that it's a two-part process, that the body returns to the dust as it was, and the soul returns and the spirit returns to God who bestowed it, that they are intertwined, that in order for the spirit to fully return to the God who bestowed it, the body must return to the ground from where it came. Where do we see burial in the Torah? All over the place. Starts with Sarah. Abraham went to great lengths to buy the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. If we remember, he bought it for an exorbitant fee to make a burial place for his wife. Abraham's children, Yitzchak and Yishmael, buried their father. Jacob buried his wife Rachel. Jacob requested that he not be buried in Egypt, but that his body be taken back to the land of his forefathers. And Joseph did that. Joseph carried Jacob's body to Israel. Joseph's last request was that when the Jews are going to come out of slavery, they should take his body with them. And in fact, Moses, while the Jewish people were getting ready to leave, they were all collecting the silver and gold from the Egyptian neighbors. Moses was out looking for Joseph's coffin, and he miraculously found it and took it back with him. Moses died in the desert, yet the Jewish people carried Joseph's bones to Shechem, and that is where Joseph is buried. The Torah recounts that God himself buried Moses. And if we look at the Israeli army, modern day, the Israeli soldiers will put their lives at extreme risk to go behind enemy lines to capture and to save their fallen soldiers and bring them back to ensure that they get a Jewish burial. And that's because this mitzvah is so important to us. And you can look at, it may be brought down in one of the appendixes, but it's interesting to look at the story of Ruth and Naomi from the story of that many people read on Shavuot, that one of her requests actually was to be, and one of the proofs that she wanted to convert was that she wanted to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So we see going back 3,000 years, we have reference to specific Jewish cemeteries and definitely to Jewish burial. Unfortunately, so now we have our basis. We know that the Torah commands us to bury, and we see that throughout the ages, our people have buried. Unfortunately, there is a serious threat to burial, which is the prevailing popularity of cremation, which is rising, first of all, in the non-Jewish population. I was speaking to Jose, the manager here at Star of David, for those of you who know him, and he's a Catholic. And for them also, lahavdil, they do not look highly on cremation. And he was buying another burial plot for his uncle or someone who needed a new burial plot. And he figured, let him ask his nieces and nephews as well if they want him to buy for them. And they said, no, we're being cremated. And he was shocked to hear that. In 1960, 3.6% of Americans that died were cremated. By 2015, according to the National Funeral Directors Association, there were more people who were cremated than buried. In 2018, 53.1% of Americans chose cremation. And the projection, according to the NFDA, is that by the year 2035, 78.8% of people will opt for cremation. So 1960, we had 3.6%. And by 2035, that's 70 years later, we're talking 78% are opting for cremation. It's impossible to know how many Jews are choosing cremation, but
Any
it's very
idea why?
clear. Sorry?
Any ideas why or speculation? I mean, I have a guess.
Go on.
Cost. I hate to say the cemetery business is big business.
Yeah, and I was planning on saying that soon. Let's say this now. If you know anyone who would love to be buried, but is choosing cremation because of the costs, please call me.
I'm not saying I advocate it, but I think that's a driving force is economics.
It is. It is. And if you know anyone who could be convinced of a burial and understands that burial is important, or if they don't understand why burial is important, you're going to take everything that you're learning now and you're going to speak to them. If they understand but are held back by finances, please call me and we'll figure it out. There's a organization in New York, an organization locally that will help everything to make sure that everyone can get a Jewish burial for the reasons that we are going to discuss now. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
So, first of all, it's not so surprising considering how naturally influenced we are by our host culture. However, for many issues, it is an economic issue, as Mark said. Unfortunately, many Jews believe that cremation is permissible, and that's not helped by Jewish funeral homes advertising cremation. So cremation destroys the body and thus makes it impossible to fulfill the biblical injunction to bury the dead because there's no dead left after cremation. Let's talk about a few facts of cremation, which is, first of all, the bones are not burned. They are pulverized. They are ground in a grinding machine. The ashes are mixed with ashes of others. They are swept out. The oven is swept out between each person, but there are still remains of others, which means that your beloved would be left in the oven for someone else, and someone else's ashes would be mixed with the ashes of your beloved. And if somebody would try to bury the ashes that they got, they would still not be burying the dead. The owner of one of the biggest crematoria in South Florida said that he would never get cremated. We're talking about temperatures of over 1,500 degrees, and depending the length and heat depends on the size of the person. And if we remember what we spoke, that there's a part of the soul, the nefesh, that remains with the body. Let's think about what that might be doing to the nefesh, the pain that might cause. So first of all, as Mark said, everything comes down to economics, but not really. There are some decisions that are soul decisions. Some decisions that, we go out to a restaurant to eat and may spend $75, $100, or if we're with company, $250 on a meal that we could have made for $25 at home. The question is how important things are to us. I don't think there could be anything more important to us sitting here today than our soul's connection and our soul's journey and our soul's eternity.
Not to mention it's a one-time event for that person.
Please explain.
Meaning that burial is only happening once. It's one shot. It's not like you get to do. It's not like it's a do-over if you didn't do it right at the restaurant the first time.
Right.
So I could see the magnitude and the importance of it, obviously.
Right. Thank you. So burial is so important because it affirms the fundamental two of the fundamental Jewish beliefs. Number one, which is what we just spoke before, that our body does not belong to us. Our body belongs to God, and God entrusted us with the body, and we can't do whatever we want with it. We have to do what the instruction manual is. And number two is the fundamental belief of the resurrection of the dead. Wow. The fundamental belief of the resurrection of the dead is that if we believe that our soul will re-enter our body will be reconstructed, will be rebuilt when Mashiach comes, and we will once again live, we would make sure that the body is put away in a careful place. If there's something that we're putting away for a meanwhile, and we want to bring it back and use it in the future, we're going to carefully deposit it in the closet. We're not going to throw it around or burn it. So cremation is an implied statement of rejecting these two things: the God's ownership of our bodies and the holiness of our body, and our belief in the resurrection of the dead. Cremation is a permanent declaration that without the soul, the body is lifeless and has no value. And it is therefore so important, even for someone who is not so strict or not so careful about other matters in Torah and mitzvahs, to be sure to get a proper Jewish burial. Because it's like Mark said, it's a one-time thing. We don't get a second chance. And it's a fundamental belief that of who we are and what we stand for as Jews. It's also interesting to note that some people opt for cremation because they are very sensitive to ecological issues and don't want their remains to utilize the land that's needed. So a few things to note, which is, first of all, it has been argued that cremation releases lots of carcinogenic material into the atmosphere, and it actually uses more energy than an in-ground burial. And the truth is that a kosher Jewish burial is what people are calling today a green burial, which is a burial that does not leave much residue and is friendly to the environment. A few more important points to remember is that money spent does not equal dignity received. You'll see people trying to sell you fancy metal caskets or fancy pine caskets. The truth is that the more simple, the better it is, almost always. The more simple the burial is, the better it is for the soul. The cheapest option is usually the best. I heard a story, we'll have to share it later. So what cremation does is it disables a person from having that connection to God, from allowing the soul to reconnect with the body and to fully process the mourning. It is a rejection of God's ownership of our bodies and God's creation of the world. And it is a rejection of the statement that when Mashiach comes, we will once again be resurrected. Again, with the full sensitivity, the following, I am not saying that a cremated body cannot be resurrected. I am not saying that the 6 million Jews who were cremated against their will, God forbid, that they should not be resurrected. They are from the holiest of our nation, who were killed for the mere fact that they were Jews, who stood strong to their Judaism and died as Jews, died for the name of God. They are holy, and they have a very special place in Gan Eden. Additionally, what I am about to say does not apply to people who did not understand what we are about to say before they chose cremation, which is the Mishnah tells us that someone who rejects Olam Haba, someone who rejects the idea that we will be resurrected, will not be part of the resurrection. Their soul will come back in a different body. And it has been argued that one who opts for cremation is saying that same thing, like we just explained. Someone who opts for cremation is saying that they don't believe that we will be resurrected, and they therefore will not be resurrected. As a deterrent against cremation, burial or storage in a Jewish cemetery of cremated remains of someone who freely and willingly opted to be cremated is forbidden. And if a person chose to be cremated, the family does not sit Shiva, and it is questionable whether the family can say Kaddish. Such conversations, and I've had them with people who, the family members of deceased, when their loved one is laying in front of them, getting prepared to be cremated. That is not the time to have such conversations. It's a very emotional time and it's a very hard time. And it's not the time for such conversations. On very rare occasions are we successful in changing people's minds at that time. Have these conversations now with your friends, with your family, with your loved ones. You can have them contact me if you'd like, if they'd be open to such a conversation. It's imperative to deal with these things before so that we can be clear and with a clear conscience that they are getting the very best for their beloved. And we are getting the very best for our friends and family and the people that we love.
Rabbi, may I ask a question?
I'm gonna ask, we're running close to the end of the class. Can you save it till the end?
Sure, I just wanted to understand what resurrection is, since the soul has already gone to heaven. What is being resurrected?
Okay, I think that's an important, a very important question. Let's, for one quick moment, digress. The fundamental principle is, and you can read this, you can search the Rambam, Maimonides, the 13 Principles of Faith, is that as a reward for what we have done here in this world, when Mashiach comes, there will be a period of time, according to the Rambam, according to others, it will last eternity, that our bodies will be created once again. We will be healed from all our sicknesses, and we will be able to enjoy the spiritual aspects of this world without any physicality. The next course that we're going to have from JLI is going to get much more into this. For a brief summary, we will live again. We will live again as a reward for the good that we did here in this world.
Thank you.
I hope that addresses the question to a certain
Yes,
degree.
it does.
Text number 15a on page number 64. It is imperative, and we will bend over backwards and do everything that we can to implement the expressed final wishes of the deceased. And it is therefore understandable that if somebody has opted for cremation, that we would want to go with those wishes, and that we would want to do everything that they ask. However, the same Torah that tells us that we have to listen to them gives an exception, which is text number 15b. If a person requested not to be buried, we disregard the request. This is because burial is a mitzvah, as it is stated, you shall surely bury him. And there is also logic to this, which is that the soul is now in a higher place. The soul is now in the world of truth. And the soul is going to be pained if we go ahead and cremate them. The soul doesn't want that. They don't want that anymore. Perhaps they had a different understanding while they were here or didn't understand anything when they made those decisions. But now that they're in the world of truth and they see things for the way they are, they want us to change that plan. They want us to change that mind, and they will be very happy if we give them a proper burial. In addition to that, what we just explained, that our body does not belong to us. If someone will write in their last will and testament that when they die, they want their children to burn down the neighbor's house, it would be foolish to listen. Our body does not belong to us, and we don't have the right to decide to burn it after we die, God forbid. And it is safe to assume that the soul will rain down blessings and beseech from God to give special blessings to anyone who aids the soul's journey by allowing the body to get a proper burial. In summary, burial is our highest priority in Jewish history. It affirms that that our body belongs to God, that God created the world and created our bodies. And it is an affirmation of the principles of faith in the resurrection of the dead. Cremation makes this impossible, and cremation rejects these two ideas. We spoke about some of the deterrents that have been set in place, and we spoke about how does a person's last will and testament, someone's last wishes, fit in if they've made a decision to be cremated. There's some interesting appendixes at the end of the class that you can look at. Let us go quickly through section number 4. The nefesh remains in the grave. Interment is not the end. And like we said before, that the nefesh remains, and you can read text number 16 about how when we go to the grave, which part of the soul are we connecting to? The entire soul is one being with different levels, as we explained before, the different levels of consciousness. The part of the nefesh is what remains by the grave, and that in tune awakens the other parts of the soul. The soul is very happy when we come, though not necessarily in the first year. There may be limits, and I think we're going to get into that next week. But as a general rule, we can appreciate the soul when we're visiting the grave. The soul appreciates our visit. We pray for the ascent of the soul. The soul prays for blessings for us. And it is customary on specific days which are auspicious for prayer, for example, the Yartzeit, the day before Rosh Hashanah, the day before Yom Kippur, and other special days during the year, to visit the grave. And you can read in text number 17 about the connection that we have and how the souls want us to visit. We see in history that there were people who wanted to remain near their friends and family who could come and visit them. In summary, the nefesh is connected with the grave. It's a communication port that we can connect and ask them to pray for us, and they are very happy when we come. In conclusion, there is a beautiful letter from the Rebbe which summarizes a lot of what we've learned today about the physical, psychological, emotional aspect of death, the pain, and the connection, and the continuing relationship. You can please read that at your leisure. It was text number 18, which was written to a lady who lost her, I believe her father was murdered. She lost her mother as well, and her mother-in-law, all within a 5-year span. And she wrote a letter to the Rebbe explaining how she felt all alone. And the Rebbe's response is how to realize and work with the connection on a soul level, as we've explained. Question for you all. Is there a deceased? Is there someone who has passed away? Think about this in a moment for you. You'll find this exercise also. Spend a moment thinking about someone who has passed away that you want to strengthen your bond of love with. And what is a step that you can take to connect better with them and stronger with them?
Daven. Say Tehillim.
You can pray for them.
Okay. You can write these down if you'd like to in your notebook and refer to it when you're thinking about ways to connect to them. What we've covered this week, again, is we started with the essential connection that we have with our neshama. We moved on to the stages of the soul leaving the body, the stages of mourning. We spoke about the holiness of the body, the importance of burial, and visiting the grave, which we're going to get into more next week as well. Next week, Wednesday, we will speak about the departure of the soul, not from the soul's perspective, as we spoke today, but from our perspective. the grief, the pain, the loss, and the suffering of those who are left behind with a great gaping hole in their heart, as well as some Shiva etiquette. So, what is some nugget, something that you appreciated from today's class, something that you are taking with you? Can we start with Ephraim? You'll have to unmute yourself. There we go.
A very interesting approach to a subject that I know very little about. So it was a different perspective, very interesting.
Thank you, Ephraim. And thank you for joining. Mordechai, Mark.
I didn't realize the importance of the burial. I know in Judaism we place that much emphasis on it and how important it is. And unfortunately, I'm learning this after the fact with my mother just a year ago. So I think I would have looked at it differently than just another burial, so to speak. So that was a big takeaway for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Betty.
I don't know how to work it.
We hear you.
Oh, you hear me? How important it is to take care of our body, not to desecrate ourselves. And by the what we're talking about, cremation, donation of the organs. These are things that are such as if it's just a common everyday conversation, and people don't realize how important it is that the body is not ours. It's lent to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you. It was a beautiful shiur. Yasher koach.
You're welcome. Leib Maisha.
Well, let me answer your question with another question that I've been holding to the end because I know you're short on time. We spoke about the holiness of the physical body. And this is a question that relates to something that happened in my life when my father passed away. We buried him in a shroud in a plain pine box. And because it was just a plain pine box, when they put him in the ground and we began to fill in dirt, the pine box cracked in the middle of the top and dirt actually went down onto my father's face. And this has always disturbed me. Was this a desecration of the body?
It's a great question. It's a great question. It's interesting to note that in Israel, and I believe this was the custom for many, many years, they don't use caskets. The body is interred in shrouds and wrapped in a talus and placed directly into the earth without a pine casket.
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Is that your answer to my question? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow.
Sure, yeah. So they're in Israel, and the way it's been done for many years is without a casket at all. I do, however, want to address the trauma. I'm not sure if it was a desecration from a halachic perspective, and definitely if it was an accident, something that was beyond the control of anyone there.
It was very
However,
traumatic to me.
The trauma is something that is definitely very real.
But probably not to the neshama, the soul of the deceased.
Correct. Correct.
So it's a trauma to the family seeing it.
It is definitely traumatic, and I've had that image burned in my head since that time in 2012.
Wow.
Still disturbs me to this day.
That's hard. That's very hard to hear. And perhaps we could speak about it more in an individual setting. But as far as the neshama goes, I don't believe that that would be considered a desecration to the neshama. And thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Carol.
The thing that most bothered me was the swift burial, because I always wondered where my father's neshama was between the day he died and the day he was buried. And unfortunately, he died in the middle of an airplane strike. November 1973, there was an airplane strike, and we couldn't fly him home. The whole family is buried in Connecticut, and the plots were all ahead of time. Everything was planned ahead of time, and when he died, we couldn't take him home because of that. And so we had to wait. He died on Thanksgiving, which was a Thursday. And then, Friday, they weren't flying. And we were able to get a flight on Sunday. I'm not sure if it was because we were flying with a body or if it was just the end of the strike, because I don't remember. But I always was troubled by the fact that I knew we were supposed to bury swiftly. So what was his neshama doing? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I mean, it was always always something that I remembered. But, we didn't follow the halacha clearly, but we couldn't.
Right. So that's an important point. That last line, that we couldn't. We want to bury as soon as proximately possible to bury. If he was stuck somewhere and you weren't able to get to him or to bring him back, that would not be considered. There's nothing that you could have done about it. And there is more, I believe, in the appendix in the back of the lesson in your book about that, or perhaps in the footnotes. If you don't find it, please send me an email afterwards. Thank you for sharing that. Barry, what is your takeaway from today's lesson? What's something that you learned, some interesting perspective? What are you taking from today's class?
Well, I always knew cremation was a no-no, but I understand now some more reasons for it being a no-no. So thank you.
Thank you. And the Reb Marcus.
Oh, so many thoughts, so little time. There's both thoughts on both the burials and the cremation. All my cousins had themselves cremated. My father's sister's family. Although my uncle and aunt were buried in the Veterans Cemetery in Sarasota. The three sons were all cremated. And of course, they were always know-it-alls. They always knew better than ever. But so there was no talking to them. But now it's interesting to see more, more of the answers as to why and whatever. And it's actually kind of funny. Well, not funny, ironic maybe, because his wife, always carried a little bottle or bottle that was supposedly his ashes, and she also had like a tube in a little pendant where his ashes were in there. So like you're saying, who knows whose ashes those really were? So
it's hard. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. There's a lot here. I've had a lot of loss. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of loss in my life. So I'm thinking about different episodes of the different things that have come about. So it's very sad and interesting stuff for me at the same time.
Is 1500 degrees considered hell?
Okay, thank you. Thank
Rabbi,
you.
can I ask you a real
everyone.
quick one?
Yeah.
Just a last one. What happens to a soul who committed suicide? Is the state of that soul different?
It's a good question.
Good question.
It's a great question. Perhaps we can address that at a separate occasion.
Fair
The
enough.
short answer is that most people today, the argument is that they are not of sane mind and they are not making an active intellectual decision to take their own life, and therefore there is room to say that the rules would be a little bit different.
Thank you.
Hashika.
So thank you for coming. Thank you each and every one of you. Thank you, Marcus, Carol, and Barry, Betty,
Thank you for
Lakeisha,
cheering us up.
Ephraim,
Thanks,
Mark, and Joan. Thank you for coming. And I'd like to leave you off with this, which is that it is written in the texts, in the holy texts from our sages, that preparing end-of-life plans is a good omen for long life.
Mhm.
That being said, based on what we've learned tonight, if you would like to learn more, if you would like to make a decision, if you would like a draft or something to start making end-of-life plans to ensure that your body will be treated with utmost respect and that your soul will be granted the peace and restful and correct journey, helping it on its journey and helping lessen the pain, you can please reach out to me, either respond to the recording email, send me a text or a phone call, and we can help you. I can help you with that. Thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. See you next Wednesday.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.
I'm calling Reb Kopelman right
Rabbi.
now.
Please.
Bye.
Night. Good night, all.
Good night.
Right.
Night, night.
Good night.